tomorrow, Egghead. Now! Go ahead!
Hey, what's going on, everybody? So yeah, a product review video. I don't do these too often, but I needed a new wet palette for my Go Bag EVO. And I know there's lots out there, some I'm not a fan of, so I jumped on Amazon and found this one, the WetNDri Paint Tray Palette for Painting. What a great name. But what caught my eye was for the price point that you can grab most wet palettes, this thing's got the top part, which is a dry palette. So ordered this, figured what can it hurt? Now let's be clear, a wet palette doesn't need to do a whole lot. Yeah, it needs to hold some water to stay wet. It needs some sort of sponge or paper towel type of membrane to retain the moisture. And maybe if you're lucky, a lid to close it. Yeah, the rubber band, I don't know why that's there. I think it's aesthetic. It looks like some other manufacturer of wet palettes that puts a rubber band around their stuff. It does come with this little brush ladder. I probably won't use it, but it might be convenient for some people. You never know. It's handy, it's small, it fits in there easily. And then this bottom half is the wet palette area, I'm assuming, unless there's some part of this I'm just not understanding. So yeah, the top part's nice. For the price that you pay for most wet palettes, you're actually almost getting two here. That top part, if you want to use contrast paints or speed paints or some sort of washes, something you don't want on a wet palette, it's nice to have this. Or if you're doing some slap chop or zenithal, some of those bigger triangular might be a good place for white. I know that's what I've used mine for. The few times I've used it, it's been for dry brushing. So dumping some white in there so it doesn't get on the wet palette. And anyhow, it has its uses. I don't use it for everything, but it's nice to have, especially considering you're paying the same amount for this wet palette that you would for a lot of others, and you're, two-in-one kind of thing. It does come with two of these sponges, standard typical gray sponge. It'll hold 1,000 times its thickness in water. It's paper thin when you get it and open it the first time. And when you do take it home, dry it out. I will do a test later and show you how watertight this thing is. I will intentionally try to make a mess all over my desk and succeed, but we'll get to that later. These sponges, they were a little more flexible the first time, but when I bring my bag home at night from paint night and unpack, I always open this so it'll dry out and not get all mildewy and nasty, but the next day it's crinkled up like a Pringle. It's hilarious. And then you go and run it underwater and it flattens right back out. So no harm, no foul. It comes with two sponges. I'm still on my first one and I've had this for, 3-4 months. And yeah, it holds a good amount of water. Now I'm going to intentionally overfill this. I tend to keep my wet palette on my desk, more on the wet side. I like the paper floating on the surface of the water, more like a lily pad. I don't like it to continually dry out, especially with all the lights I have at my desk for filming. So I offset that by keeping my palette a little bit more full of water and letting the paper just sit on the surface. Like I said earlier, I want to try to leak and spill all over the place and see, how watertight this is. So that would probably be good enough to just use the wet palette, but I'm going to overfill it, add a bunch more water, and see if we can get this thing to spill after we, set it up and use it. Again, I said this before, wet palettes don't need to be complicated. I've seen Ziploc sandwich boxes. I've seen things from other companies that are over-engineered. I've seen things that are very simple, but just too big for travel. And this was just the right size. It happened to fit the dimensions of what I was looking for. And I had kind of resigned myself to maybe going with the army painter style because it was a lot smaller. And even the one on my desk is a Tupperware bacon box that I've been using for 7 years, and I absolutely love it. It's huge, it's easy to clean and maintain. So I don't expect a whole lot of complicated things out of a wet palette. As long as it holds water, stays wet, doesn't leak all over the place. Yeah, it kind of does what it needs to do. It's not overly complex. So just for fun, since I have it out, I'll put out a drop of paint because, like I said, when I want to tilt this on its side and shake it, I want to see if it leaks or how much this paint moves around. Another thing that I liked is the paper and the sponge. If you're the type of person who likes, a little bit of extra water, you can pull water from the side, dip your brush. If it's a clean brush, you can dip it in that water around the edge. If you're the type of person who doesn't, always want to worry about having the dirty rinse cup and getting dirty water, if you put clean water in this, you can always pull from those edges. So yeah, I like that you have that margin there if you want to use it. Thin down your paints as needed. Pull some little dabs of water up onto the paper if you need them. But yeah, it works. It's not jam-packed. Even when the sponge is full of water, it doesn't, inflate to, so big that it's bulging out of there. It fits just right. It does what it needs to do. The pre-cut paper could be just a little bit smaller, but they don't curl up very bad, so no complaints. I can say that this paper, if you agitate it too much, say you're mixing a color, or it's really, really wet, you have a lot of moisture on the surface and underneath, it starts to dissolve. The paper kind of disintegrates as your brush agitates the paper, so just be aware of that. It's not the greatest quality paper. You can always cut your own. In my 7 Things I Wish I Knew video, I talk about parchment paper. You can go buy a roll and cut dozens of sheets for less than $5. So don't buy online replacement packages. Go buy a roll and cut your own. So yeah, time to pack this thing up, put all my stuff back in it, and intentionally see if I can get this thing to leak all over my desk and make a huge mess. Other way, there we go. Okay, you got it. Because the rubber band, it helps, yeah. It's not really that tight. I don't think it would do anything engineering-wise, but yeah, let's see. Yeah, I was waiting and waiting, like maybe it'll take a sec, and no, I think we're good. Again, I do not advocate throwing a wet pallet full of water in your bag, stored upright in your backpack, and then ride your bike home. No, not gonna happen. But should you ever grab it by accident and it's got a bunch of stuff in it, it doesn't look like it's gonna be easy for it to leak. And again, I don't think that rubber band has a whole lot to do with it because it's not really that tight. So let's see what kind of mess we made inside. All right, there's no water in the top, that's good. And yeah, okay, so there's some water on the paper, but that's how much extra water I put in there just to see. I mean, look how much water's still in there. You could probably use it as is. There's still plenty of moisture in there, and you can see that I dumped out plenty onto my desk and made an awesome mess. Crap, now I gotta clean this up. Okay, the other thing to point out is that little dollop of black paint, it didn't move very much. So yeah, pretty happy with that. Now I gotta clean my desk and dry this all out, and yeah, so let's pack this up. And real quick, I wanna touch on how this has been using it as a functional wet palette, as my go-to wet palette every time I take my travel kit up to paint night. So it fits really well. There's 4 loops for bottles or whatever on the left lower part of that bag, but the right portion is where I knew I needed to store my wet palette, and this fits almost perfectly. It's also brush storage, and like I said, the top has that dry storage. So space-wise, it fits perfectly. I have no complaints about it filling the space. And as far as functionality, you can see I carry a ridiculous amount of crap in this bag. And having this wet palette is awesome. It's not too big. It's got enough real estate that I can spread out and do a few colors, do what I need to do, change out the sheets quick and easy if I need to, but it doesn't take up a huge area of the table. And every time I've set it up, it's quick, it's easy, peel off the sheet, throw it in the trash. I'll usually just squeeze out the sponge into a sink, and when I get home, open it up so it doesn't get all mildewy and nasty. But yeah, put the top half in the bag when you're not using it, tuck it out of the way if you don't need it. The wet palette, it does what it needs to do. So yeah, I'm pretty pleased with it. If you're looking for a small wet palette that maybe you want to stuff in the Go Bag EVO or likewise, some sort of travel kit, these work pretty well. I put it through its paces, no major complaints. It does what it needs to do, not overly complex. So thanks for watching, everybody. If you dug this video, give me a thumbs up. If you have information you want to share with everybody, tell me what kind of palette you use, drop it in the comments section below. Share the video with someone who might get something out of it, and subscribe if you haven't.